Hi everyone, I hope your week has been going really well. As I'd mentioned on my Instagram page, I wanted to review two fragrances together. One is called Nishane Ani, which I think has been quite hyped here on YouTube. It's a very popular fragrance. And the other is from Jovoy and it's called Remember Me. So I decided to do a dual review because both fragrances were created by Cécile Zarokian, who is a very well-respected perfumer, and both also have a very dominant vanilla note. And there is something very cozy but fresh at the same time in the two fragrances. So I find that the similarities kind of make sense for me to put these two together for a review. However, they're not dupes by any means. They're very different from each other, but I think it'd be interesting to kind of give my thoughts on both of them at the same time. I've been wearing both fragrances for the past few months now. I tried it out in hotter weather. Now that it's cooler, I know what they kind of smell like when the weather is colder. I've worn Ani about 7 times now. I bought a sample of it from Scent Split. And then for Remember Me, I wore it about the same amount of times as well. I actually got a generous decant from Amina when we did our sample swap, and my husband actually liked it so much that he was very nice and he ended up buying a full bottle of it. So I'll share my thoughts on how they smell like, kind of how they compare, even though they are very different fragrances, and I'll get into performance and things like that towards the end. Let's first begin with Ani from Nishane, which I believe is the more popular one between the two. So this one was the one that I was probably more interested in trying out because of the backstory behind this. So Ani is actually the name of an ancient city that bordered between Turkey and Armenia. And if you're aware of the history between those two countries, it hasn't been the most peaceful. There's been a lot of conflict between Armenia and Turkey. But the thing that I found interesting about this fragrance is that Nishane is a Turkish brand, and they had actually asked Cécile Zarokian, who's a perfumer of Armenian descent, to create this fragrance. So I think it's kind of neat that they, put their differences aside. They were trying to use this form of art to symbolize the harmony between the two. So I like that. I was impressed with the backstory. The way that this smells captured me on initial spray. Actually, each time I spray it, I do get captured by it because it's very invigorating. There is a greenness to it. There's an aromatic quality to it that I think comes from the cardamom. And there's a zinginess to it too that reminds me a bit of ginger, freshly grated ginger. So this is so invigorating that when I smell it each time, it kind of opens up my sinuses. So it's a very interesting experience that I get when I have the initial spray on my skin. So I like this. I like how the vanilla smells like. It's a very smooth vanilla. But I am not so much a fan of the dry down. The dry down does get less invigorating over time. What I pick up from after maybe a couple of hours is mostly this vanilla and this kind of like a mix between ambroxan and ambergris. And while I do enjoy those notes, it just doesn't feel as complex as the initial spray. And I'll get into performance later on, but this is very strong. And because it lasts so long and it's so overpowering, I do get a little bit tired of how strong that vanilla and ambergris and ambroxan smell kind of smells like. So it's not the most enjoyable for me to wear throughout the day. Now moving on to Remember Me. I actually prefer this on myself, to be honest. I don't get tired of this fragrance. I love smelling it on myself for hours, and I do have some scent memories associated with this, which is probably why I prefer it over Ani. So when I first spray Remember Me, it took me back to my childhood because the initial spray had this powderiness to it that reminded me of biting into this meringue treat that I used to eat when I was a kid. I've never been able to find that meringue treat again. I think it was a homemade snack that a family friend had made. I have no idea what it's called either, but I could almost feel that texture of biting into that treat when I spray this fragrance. So as it develops though, it becomes a little bit more complex. So it does get into that territory of being a tea fragrance. So tea is one of the notes in this. If you've seen my past video on tea fragrances, you might be aware of how picky I am when it comes to fragrances that have that accord or that note. It really has to be realistic for me to wear it. So this does a very good job of recreating that black tea note. It actually reminds me of chai, a chai latte even. There is a milkiness to it. It definitely has that lactonic accord. And in addition to kind of recreating that Assam black tea or Darjeeling tea, it has a spiciness to it as well, as if that the spices of cardamom and some ginger are mixed in with the tea. And that combination between that and then putting in the milk is just fantastic. I love the execution of that accord in this fragrance. And on top of that, in addition to being that kind of gourmand fragrance, there is the floral notes of frangipani or plumeria. I love the smell of plumeria, and it kind of adds that little hint of the yellow tropical floral notes to this fragrance. So I do find this a lot more enjoyable to wear on me personally. So according to my personal taste, I think it is clear that I do prefer Remember Me when we're just talking about the scent. I always look forward to wearing it. I get excited about having to put it on. With Ani, when I was testing it out, I kind of had to force myself to motivate myself to wear it. I was hoping that my mind would change after each wear, but honestly, my thoughts pretty much remained the same from the first wear through the 7th wear. Nothing much has changed about it. It's not the most complex, I would say, but you know, complexity isn't something that a lot of people seek out. I think it's very crowd pleasing. I could totally see why a lot of people like it. And if you're surrounded by people who like the smell of vanilla, they might compliment you. For me, if I'm gonna pick a scent for myself, it definitely was Remember Me. One advantage that Ani does have over Remember Me though is the performance of it. It is very far in its projection. I remember I wore it one time when I went to the post office, and people were turning their heads towards me when I was passing them by, and we were definitely socially distancing, so they were at least 8 feet away. So the projection on this and the sillage of it is very strong. And I would say it did last a lot longer than Remember Me. So on my skin, Ani lasted about, I think, at least 10 hours. And sometimes I do spray it in the shower. I tend to do that with some of my samples that I'm trying to finish up. And in the shower, it can last about 2 days. So longevity is no problem. Remember Me is not as strong of a performer, but I am the type of person who puts how a scent smells like over performance, but it's still not a bad performing scent by any means. So on my skin, Remember Me lasted about 7 to 8 hours, which I think is quite strong. The sillage isn't as large, the projection isn't as big, but it does leave a little bit of a scent trail. My husband is able to smell it on me from about 4 feet away. Not as strong as Ani again, but I think it's acceptable. So those are pretty much what I think about the two fragrances. To kind of recap, I do prefer Remember Me over Ani, although Ani does perform better than Remember Me. But I think if you're trying to decide between the two, you should definitely try both of them out. I could see one same person having both in their collection. They're very different, but I do prefer one over the other. And you know, it's just a matter of personal taste and preference. So let me know if you tried both of them or if you agree with my thoughts for both these fragrances. I'd really love to know. But those are pretty much what I think about both fragrances.